right? And therefore there are some restrictions that I bear because of how I was conditioned and born and created and functioned or learned to function, negotiate through life. So when I use these words, please don't take offense. I'm laying it out for what it is. All right. I disagree with Joe on one point that I believe that I'm not going to go into deep, but I do believe that if he and I and a couple of others would form some kind of a panel in the future that would allow us 3.5 hours to fully discuss the issue, right? I think that everyone will come away from it fantastically, and that is, he says that racism, right, is not, quote, a sickness, right, but rather, that it's a deliberate, intentional item. Well, if you're not understanding tribalism or clanism, right, a lot of us inherit that, right? Our tribe is the baddest tribe on the planet. My father can kick anybody's ass. All I need to do is go get him, right? And those extremes, those absolutes, mark and define much of how we learn to think. Where was I born? Every time I step outside of New York City, I'm from New York, which is interesting because all four of my grandparents are from a different corner of Puerto Rico, right? And here I'm born on another island, right? Now, every time I step outside of New York, right, and the moment that I open up my mouth, wherever I am, somebody gonna say, "You from New York?" And I say, "No, I'm from Brooklyn." And it's automatic. There's a provincial, tribal characteristic in the human being. And when it becomes an ism, tribalism, provincialism, right? Who nurtured you? What nurtured you in terms of environment? And what taught you how to negotiate initially? That's your provincial side. And if you stay stuck there, you'll never see the planet for what it is. Because you define everything according to what you learn, right? Even the very language that we use is racist. You got to get into that whole melanin thing. Too many people use it erroneously. Every human being requires melanin. Right? No human being can survive without melanin. The difference between each of us is the degree to which each of us require how much melanin. The more melanin you have, the darker you are. The less melanin you have, the lighter you are. The darker you are, the less hair follicles you likely to have. The lighter you are, the more hair follicles you're likely to have. And both the hair follicles and the melanin are there to do the same thing, to get rid of that last poison from the sun that comes through the ozone and gets to hit Earth, right? Like what they used to call, remember in high school, photosynthesis. But where I disagree is that with Kay, is that I genuinely think I stopped using the word racism in '91 because it was too much of, it was not satisfactory to me. What I saw was psychosis. We suffer from the results of a psychotic culture. When you burn witches alive in Europe, and then burn black men for insurrection in the United States, but not just burn them, you roast them on a spit, slowly. Both actions are psychotic in their nature. Right? You don't burn a human being and stand around and watch and laugh and bring your babies so that they can see that shit too. But the struggle of privilege is defined by three different forms of control. how much control over land, how much control over labor, and how much control over leg. Leg, he who controls the woman controls the future. And that's how come you and I are here with different colorations, even though we are in one form or another of African descent. And even white folks. So don't forget, right? If the human being is 3 to 4 million years old, and he's only been out of Africa, right, for 400,000 years at best, right? And that means that the human being has lived in Africa, the difference between 4 million and 400,000. That's 3,600,000 years, where the human being lived only in one locale. Right? You with me? So, in that sense, we're all descendants of Africa. But see, we deny that. And we deny the painful history, what Joe was talking about, the painful history of the African American in the United States. But stop. That's not enough. Latinos and Asians can't get away from that. They can't escape that. They can't say, well, I'm not black. Well, I'm not one of them. No, wait a minute. You're not studying your history enough. Please. From Canada to Chile, there was not one place that the Europeans from the West, Western Europeans, did not invade, conquer, and enslave. That's number one. Number two, there is not one place in this hemisphere where the African was not kidnapped and taken to that spot. All right, 12 to 15% of the population of the United States is labeled as of African descent. 15% of Ecuador, so too. 10% of Peru, 45% of Brazil, 24% of Venezuela, 30% of Colombia, and 60% of all of the 3,000 islands in the Caribbean. All of them are people of African descent. So what is an African American if not a hemispheric phenomenon? But you see, we each speak a different language behind the oppressor who conquered and enslaved and conditioned even the whites. All right. Don't forget the indentured servant. By the way, in the beginning of the United States history, there were no slaves. All of them, both, were indentured servants. Eventually, because white and black indentured servants were conspiring together for their freedom, then the owner of the debt, indentured, right? The owner of the debt decided that it was better to separate them. So whites became the indentured, worked literally to death. And blacks became the chattel, not literally worked to death in the United States, because they were, that's a piece of property. Check that out. If I can only work you for 7 years, I'm going to work you to death. But if I own you for your whole life, I'm going to make sure that I get 40, 50 years of work out of you, not 6.5. You with me? So you got to understand that. But there's another thing. Not race, as much as caste. C-A-S-T-E. All right? Please. This hemisphere is represents the only culture in the history of the world where class and caste were merged together into one system. So every time whites and blacks did attempt to work together, the CIO, as opposed to the AFL, right, that struggle was absorbed by the other and weakened. Right? Martin Luther King, right, represents a bridge between them. That's why he was pushing nonviolence, because he wanted whites to understand, right, the phenomenon of oppression, right, against themselves too. Right after the Civil War, white and black poor farmers worked together. But the upper class that never lost ownership over the land after the Civil War, the same people who owned the land before the Civil War were the same people who owned the land after the Civil War. No agrarian reform, no redistribution of the wealth. That's where we have always been. A refusal on that part. Now, How did racism play a role in charging tuition in 1970, starting in 1976? Actually, it was 1975. I was given a number of questions. I'm going to try to address them. Look at the 14th and the 15th Amendments, and you see the story there. The 14th Amendment says that every citizen is guaranteed equal protection under the laws. And the 15th Amendment allowed, again, a separation between those who were united prior to the Civil War, men and women. Right? Do we give the vote to the black men, or do we give the vote to the white women? You with me? That's what the battle was. Frederick Douglass says, look, if it's got to be that way, give it to the black man first. Right? He paid for it. Right? Well, the black woman didn't pay for it. Wow, I mean, but that's another issue. The result was that the feminists and the black liberationists ended up allowing for a schism to be created between them, where they were the most cooperative elements, right, before the Civil War, in terms of abolition. Right? They wanted universal suffrage at one point together. But it wasn't until the 19th Amendment that you did it. Well, why do I bring that up as an example? Because when in 1847-48, when the free school, the free academy was established, that eventually became City College, that eventually became the City University. When that was done, it was done for those who otherwise did not have access to higher education because they couldn't afford it. You with me? But back then, that meant Irish, Jews, and Italians. It didn't mean black folk. No way. Stop. That's 1847. Slavery is still existing. And by the 1940s, 100 years later, the demographics had changed tremendously vis-a-vis the Industrial Revolution. Well, by the way, when the thing about, I said earlier that Asians can't get away from this and Latinos can't get away from this. Let's be clear about this. All right? Okay. With Asians, when the British outlawed slavery, they didn't want to pay the former enslaved wages for the same work. So they kidnapped, don't forget the word Shanghai, right? It's not just a noun, it's a verb. Right? They kidnapped Chinese and people from India, those Indians, right? East Indians, Indonesians, they kidnapped them and brought them over here as indentured servants and literally worked them to death. You got to read up on that. In Guyana, in Cuba, throughout the British Caribbean. I'm sorry.
In Jamaica?
Honey, serious. As a matter of fact, in Cuba, the interesting thing is that when the Cubans began to go to war to abolish slavery, the Chinese in Cuba were fighting right along beside them, right? Quote unquote. What led to open admissions? Stop for a second. Right? That was black and Puerto Rican students working conjointly. All right? To do what? Not just to allow for the door that had been cracked open to be pushed wide open and let anybody with a college, high school diploma in. Right? Give them access versus privilege. Give them that access. Let them kick it too. If they can't, that's their problem. If they can, guess what? They're going to add to our wealth. That's the stupidity of whites because they resisted any changes whatsoever. But we weren't just after opening up the door. We wanted to change the curriculum. We always talk about open admissions as if it was only one thing, when there were 5 demands. Among them, to establish, quote unquote, an Institute of Third World Studies. Why? Because we wanted the entire student population to be fully aware of all of the planet's culture, struggles, and differences and commonalities. In this culture, what makes it psychotic is that in this culture, the culture is psychotic. What makes the culture psychotic is that difference is never allowed. If you don't conform to me, you ain't shit. You ain't good enough. But if you cut your hair, fix yourself, dress exactly like me, white shirt and tie and suit, right? That's a European model. Look at how I dress. I'm 67 years old. I ain't stopped dressing like this every day since 1975. You with me? Right? Why? Because I'm not allowing another to determine what my values are and how I'm going to present myself. Right? Now, what can students do today about this? You got to recognize certain things about your own selves in order to engage in the kind of struggle that will be long-lasting and win. Among those things that you have to recognize is the extent to which you have studied the situation correctly and fully outside of the classroom, because you ain't going to get it in the classroom. The only thing you're going to get is peripheral. But when you go, you know the funny thing about seniors? Every senior at some point recognizes how much there is still to learn. All right? Guess what? That's the point at which you become your best teacher. If you really genuinely care about your intellect just as much as you do your study. You know, you eat 3 times a day, you don't read 3 times a day. With it? Unless it's assigned to you, and that's crooked. Because the book has already been picked. And the expectation has already been determined. Right? But when you go to educate yourself, you hunting down books that didn't nobody ever hear about. You with me? Right? Now that's feeding yourself. If you can eat 3 times a day, damn it to hell, you can read 3 times a day. And if you can do both, then you should be writing as well. Why? Because you cleanse yourself when you write, and you define your mission when you write. When you give voice to your voice. That's key. Right? That's liberation. That's why y'all like poets so much. By the way, I'm a poet. That's why y'all like poets so much. Because they help in the cleansing. Right? The problem with a lot of the rap that y'all be hearing is that it's all about the leg. Right? Control over the woman. Abusing the woman. Wait. Every time you use that B word, I'm looking at my 2 grandmothers. I'm looking at my mom and my aunts. I'm looking at my sisters. I'm looking at my cousins. I'm looking at my wife. I'm looking at my daughters. I'm looking at my granddaughter. I would never use that B word to describe them. So why should I use it to describe somebody else's? You with me? But no, it's okay to use the word because you found it acceptable. Bullshit. It was thrown at you, and you went for it. You get conditioned. But here's the key about the tendencies that we all have. Half of what you do in life has to do with your attitude. If your attitude is there, the rest of it will come too. If your attitude ain't there, none of it will come to you. But check out the attitude that you could have. There are 7 of them that I've identified. 1, you can be an accommodationist. Just simply get along to get along. Leave it alone. Right? Don't question it. You know, you be on a job. You don't want to get fired, right? So you accommodate the situation and mind your business and keep your mouth shut. I have 5 pages of one-liners in terms of employment history because I never could stay in one job more than 2.5 years. I've been working since I was 16. I'm 66. You with me? That's 50 years of working. And I got 5 pages of one-liners, right? Dates, who I worked for, what the job title was, boom, next line. You know, like that, right? Because there'd always be a point at which somebody would want me to accommodate them, and I can't. I can't do that because I refuse to lie. You hired me to counsel, I'm going to counsel the shit out of you. Not to just simply give up what it is that they say give up. The accommodations, the autonomous, that's where you get your cultural nationalism from. That's where you get your curricula of diversity and multiculturalism. Ain't nothing wrong with multiculturalism in terms of teaching history. But it was created to deny black history. So we talk about the Yugoslavs among us, and that's multiculturalism. But that's all right, but they're not here. You understand what I'm saying? Right? Ain't nothing wrong with me understanding the whole planet, but not at the expense of the people I live with right here. There's got to be a balance between them. All right? There ain't one Caribbean person who is not of African descent. It's impossible. Why? Because of the control over land, labor, and leg. Land, the resources, labor, productivity, and leg, control over the woman. That's been the triple contradiction between access and privilege and human struggle. Autonomous, the separatists, what we call nationalists. Okay, y'all get down there and do all of this crazy stuff that y'all been doing to me? To hell with it. I'm breaking away. I want my own nation, and that's correct. And national sovereignty is correct. But guess what? Ever since Reagan, straight through to Obama, national sovereignty has gone down the drain and into the grave. How the hell do I get to invade Libya? You with me? How do I invade Afghanistan? Iraq? And where the hell did the $1 trillion disappear to when it was transferred from Washington, D.C. to Iraq by military and the damn $1 trillion disappeared? Cash money? That's not no messenger carrying an envelope from here to there. That's an entire army that accompanied that $1 trillion. How the hell did it disappear? And nobody says a word about it. Annexationists, those who belong to one power and prefer to belong to another power. We have that tendency. Right? We can become Republicans or Democrats instead of a genuine people party. We want to be annexed by the ones in power. Capitulationists. Honey, when you capitulate, you ain't got no morals. You got no ethic. You just go right on ahead and go with the okie-doke because it's the law. Assimilationists. You want so much to be a part of the other that you become like the other instead of insisting that you remain yourself. Let's marry what? Let's look like who? Whatever it is that I was born to look like, that's what I'm supposed to preserve and nurture. Why? Because it's my difference and my uniqueness and my specialty. That don't mean I can't love you. It just means that I have to pay attention to the fact that I can easily assimilate into becoming the other instead of pursuing what it is that I need to pursue. And in conjunction with the other is cool. There has never been a war fought and won without natural allies hooking up. Go back to the Trojan War, the Iliad. The Greeks united around themselves and they, they subordinated their differences between them for the common cause. We're going to destroy Troy. The last black city, mulatto city, in the Mediterranean from the ancient days prior to Greece. Y'all know about that, right? That before there was Greeks, there was black folk living in that area. They call them Ionians. You go check them out and see that curlish hair on all their statues. And you tell me that that's from Northern European. Them curl, you check out them statues. In either case, the seventh one are the rejectionists. They're willing to become what we used to call in the 60s revolutionary nationalists or socialists. And worse, because that's become a curse word, communists. But look at the words. Ism means the absolute belief in, you name it. Capitalism, there's only one thing that matters. Capital. You know, like when we grow up, we always be learning to say, money talks and bullshit walks. You remember that? Y'all remember that? You didn't hear that one? That's what we used to say. Money talks, everything else is foolishness. In other words, that's your road to power, quote unquote, or at least that's what people believe. We're given to believe. Socialism, the society comes first. Communism, the community comes first. Fascism, what are you talking about earlier? Whatever I say, that's the shot. And you ain't got nothing to say but to conform, capitulate, assimilate, and obey. You understand? All right. In either case, I think that I went beyond. So we got a hot hour, so if we're interchanging, I think I laid enough down so that we could do that. And if I could get 5 minutes near the end, I got a poem for you.